Yeah, so now it is started. Okay, so good morning everyone, and it's a great pleasure to have Professor Prakash with us, who will be talking about delay differential equation and also methods to solve it. And he has a lot of experience working in this particular field, and he and of late he also started working in perturbation methods. So you can interact with him to whatever extent, and he can give you the problem for any complicated mathematical model that you are having. So that I can assure you. So with these words, Prakash, I invite you to start your lecture.
Thank you so much, Ashok. Um, Thank you for inviting me to give this lecture for the students of this course. Um, Before I start my course, I would like to show you one video. And from that video, we will slowly proceed to the more understanding of the nonlinear mechanics. So give me 1 second, let me play that video. So I hope all of you can see this video. Um, so someone maybe Balaji, you can reply to my questions so that others won't get disturbed. Is that video visible, Balaji?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So this is a Coca-Cola can, and what you see is that on top of that they have put a large amount of weight, but nothing is going to happen as of now, and the cola can seems to successfully bear the weights without collapsing. Okay, so as I play the video, you see what is happening. See, someone is now probing it. That means they are going to just touch it. Okay. So it has collapsed with such a small disturbance. I'll play it again. Please watch it. Okay. So given that you have seen this video, let's approach this problem and try to understand how differential equations come into picture when studying mechanical systems. Imagine that, um, let me show you one quick example. See, you have seen the cola can, but imagine if there was a rocket, okay, with a large payload. Okay, it's a very crude rocket I am drawing. So this is a payload. Uh, this is a payload, and this is a rocket. So there is a thrust P that acts when it flies. Okay, so this rocket is subjected to heavy compressive loads, and even if not designed properly, this can buckle, just like how the cola can has buckled. Okay, and the entire mechanical design is wasted because the rocket will not reach the place we want it to go. Okay, and you have seen that these kind of things happen very quickly. You know, the instability or uh, the buckling, we call it, happens very quickly. Okay, now let's take to study this entire problem. See, ideally I would like to cover up delay differential equations, but before going to delay differential equations, we should get a feel of why we study even ordinary differential equations, then we go to delay differential equations. So let's take um, a simple pendulum. Okay, um, I will use OneNote because I'm more comfortable with that. Just give me 1 second. So let's say I have a pendulum. This is a pendulum of length L, and this angle, the angle with the vertical, I call it theta. And there is a load that always stays vertical, that is the load P. Remember, the load is always vertical. Of course, there can be gravity. We can add gravity. Okay. Let's say gravity is downwards. Okay. Now, also, let's say this pendulum is having a spring and a damper with coefficient K and C. So this is like, in a way, see, don't get confused with the spring and damper. What are these? If you remember the doors that we open, right, when a lot of these doors have a spring and damper on top of that, when you open it, they automatically close. Why are they automatically getting closed? Because there is a device on top of the door that pushes the door so that it closes. Okay, such a device is attached to this pendulum. That's what it means. That means when you disturb it, the spring and damper will make sure that it will go back to equilibrium. But what is the load doing? If I disturb it, the load is trying to take it away from the equilibrium. Away from the equilibrium. So the load is trying to take it away from the equilibrium. Let's say the equilibrium is vertically upward position. Okay, if I disturb it, the spring and damper are pushing it back to the equilibrium. If I disturb it, the load is trying to take it away from the equilibrium. Okay, so let's write, let's draw a free body diagram of this thing. Okay, no, not free body diagram. I'll just write the equations of motion. Okay, so there is a torque that is acting, which is proportional to k theta, and there is a damping torque that is acting towards the left side, that is proportional to c theta dot, that is equal to, actually, in fact, and there is a clockwise torque due to this load P. Okay, and it is acting at a distance of, from simple trigonometry, this distance turns out to be L sine theta. Okay, so this distance is L sine theta. So the movement, the clockwise movement, is PL sine theta. There is a clockwise movement, that is PL sine theta. Now the sum of all these, see, OneNote has collapsed. It's a standard thing for OneNote. You know, sometimes it just collapses. So, okay. So there is a clockwise torque that is applied, which is PL sine theta. So I have minus C theta dot minus K theta plus PL sine theta must be equal to the inertial force. Since I have taken this angle to be positive, I am going to write the inertial force to be J theta double dot, and J is nothing but ml square, because this is a point mass that is at a distance of L. So its moment of inertia about the pin is nothing but ml square. Okay, so now the equation of motion I am going to write. Okay, students, I have neglected gravity. You can assume it as a horizontal device, or you can think that gravity forces are too small and can be neglected, or it is in space. Okay, even if you include gravity, it is just going to uh, create a force like mg into L sine theta. So this term will be P plus mg. Instead of P, you will have P plus mg because it is another vertical force, right? For example, this P could be, since gravity is also vertical, I can always add mg here, right? Okay. But that term I am neglecting. Even if you want to include it, we can include it. It's not a problem. If you think that we will include it, we will include it. Now, let's see what is this equation. Theta is the angle of the pendulum. This equation is obtained from Newton's law. So it's a physical model of the problem. It defines the way it defines the way the system is going to behave, and its motion is given by theta. Okay, and theta dot is the velocity and theta dot is the acceleration. Now you can see that it's a second order differential equation. Okay, what do you mean? What do I mean by order? Order is the highest order derivative that is appearing in this differential equation, and you can see that it is 2, because what is theta double dot? Theta double dot is nothing but d square theta by dt square. I'm just writing it because maybe some people may not know the notation. Okay, and theta dot is nothing but okay. Now, since writing d square theta by dt square and d theta by dt is painful to me, I use the notation dot. So double dot is the second derivative and first dot is the first derivative of theta, and of course theta is a function of time. Now it's a second order differential equation, so it requires for unique solution, it requires two initial conditions to be prescribed, and they are the angle at time 0 must be prescribed and the velocity time 0 must be prescribed, which can be, for example, some angle alpha. This can be some velocity beta. So this describes the complete description of the system. So this differential equation will govern the spring damper supported vertical pendulum subjected to a vertically downward force of magnitude P and another force that is equal to mg, which is coming due to its weight. Okay. Now, certain things we can observe from this expression is that we will simplify it further. Okay. So I'm going to divide everything with ml square. Okay. So I have here c by ml square. I have here k by ml square. Ml square. So L and L will get cancelled here. Okay. Now for a given system, if I fix M and L, okay, that is a mass is known, the length is known, gravity is known, the parameters are C, K and P. So I'm going to define new parameters. C bar equal to C by ml square. K bar equal to K by ml square. And P bar equal to this quantity. So now the differential equation has become defining these variables. There are three parameters: the damping C bar, the stiffness K bar, and the load T bar. Now it is subjected to the following initial conditions. Okay, position initial condition and the velocity initial condition. Okay. Now, can you tell me if this equation is linear or non-linear? This equation, is it linear or non-linear? This is a non-linear equation because if you expand sine theta in terms of Taylor series, you have terms like theta, theta cube, theta power 5, theta power 7 and so on. And even otherwise, sine theta is a non-linear function. Okay, so this differential equation is a non-linear differential equation. Okay, now how do we go about studying it? Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is teach you something called, okay, now it's a second order differential equation. So any nth order differential equation can be converted into n first order differential equations. Okay, that's what I'm going to attempt first. Okay, so let me define theta 1. It's a new variable is theta. So I'm defining theta 1 as theta, and I'm defining theta 2 as theta dot. So theta 1 is the position, theta 2 is the velocity. So what is the derivative of theta 1? Theta 1 dot is theta dot is theta 2. So my first equation is theta 1 dot equal to theta 2. That's perfectly fine. Theta 1 dot equal to theta dot equal to theta 2. Now let's go to this equation. In this equation, what is theta double dot? Theta double dot is theta 2 dot. What is theta dot? Theta dot is theta 2. What is theta? Theta 1. What is theta? Theta 1. So these are my two first order differential equations. You see, I have theta 1 dot equal to theta 2 and theta 2 dot plus this thing equal to 0. So if I take it to the right hand side, all the terms that doesn't have derivative to the right hand side, I have this equation. Okay, so this is theta 1 dot and this is theta 2 dot. If you want to see it in a more structured way, I can do it for you. So this second order differential equation has been converted into two first order differential equation by introducing these two variables. Okay, now the initial conditions for this are going to become theta. What is theta? Theta 1. nothing but theta 2. So this describes our system completely. Okay, it's plus here. So this describes our system completely in the first order form. Two first order differential equations with two initial conditions, and there are three parameters: C bar, K bar, and P bar. Is that okay? Does anybody has any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Yeah, who is that?
Yeah, I'm Jaydev.
Can you please raise? Yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
Still that non-linearities exist, right?
Yeah, it is
Just
existing.
now composed into two first order equations.
That's all.
That's only we have done, right?
That's it. That's it. You are correct. Okay. Now, now let me show you the behavior of the system by using a simple MATLAB code. Okay. This also okay, fine. So what I have done, I have written a small MATLAB code. Okay. So what this code does is that in MATLAB, I don't know how many of you know MATLAB, but MATLAB has a lot of integrators that can integrate differential equations. And you can see that this is a differential equation, right? These are differential equations. So in MATLAB, to solve differential equations numerically, we have to describe them in the first order form. So this is advantageous to us because we have already converted them into the first order form. Okay. So here is how we define the differential equations. I have two differential equations. I'm using Z here instead of theta, but if it is confusing to you, I can just change it to Z1 and Z2. So it's consistent with the code. So instead of using theta1 and theta2 for position and velocity, I'm using Z1 and Z2 because that's how I have coded it. So that's it. Okay, it's just a variable. I mean, nothing to worry. Okay, I can use x1 and x2, y1 and y2. How does it matter? Since in the code I have used z1 and z2, I have just changed the variables. Okay. Now, so z1 dot equal to z2. If even this one confuses you, I will write z1 dot equal to z2. Okay, and z2 dot to minus k bar into z1 minus c bar into z2 plus p bar into sine of z1. Check this. Exactly like this, right? z1 dot equal to z2, z2 dot equal to minus k bar into z1 minus c bar into z2 plus p bar into sine z1. And I have to output the derivatives. So I will just write z dot equal to z1 dot z2 dot. This is the syntax of MATLAB. You know, if you don't know MATLAB, I would request you to read the textbook by Professor Rudra Pratap. Let me show that book if it's available in Google so that you can buy it. Okay, MATLAB. It's called Getting Started with MATLAB, and this book is not very costly. It's only 230 rupees, and MATLAB is a very important software tool that can be used in your research or academic activities. So if you don't know programming or if you want to learn MATLAB, please use it, and please buy the book or get a copy from your library and read it. So now we have defined the differential equations, and I'm going to define k bar, c bar, and p bar. These are the parameters. And here I'm prescribing the initial condition. See, so at time t equal to 0, so if you go to the mechanical system, we have to tell what is happening at time t equal to 0. So at time t equal to 0, I am displacing the pendulum by an angle theta. Okay, I am displacing the pendulum by an angle theta, and I am releasing it. So if you contrast it with the video that I have shown, see, at time t equal to 0, nothing is happening, nothing is happening, nothing is happening. He is giving a displacement, he is disturbing it very slowly, it's not an impact. He is slowly pushing it and leaving it. Okay, so that is the initial condition we are going to give it to the pendulum. Okay, okay, that initial condition we are going to prescribe it by using this angle theta, which I am giving it as pi by 60. Pi by 60 is a very small number. See, let me tell you what is pi by 60. Pi is 180, right? What is 180 by 60? 180 by 60 is 3 degrees. So I am giving an initial disturbance of 3 degrees. My k bar is 10. My c bar is, let's say, 0.1. It's some damping. And p bar is 1. And now I can, if I click run, I can run it. After running it, what I am doing is that I am plotting the shape of the pendulum. That means I am plotting 0, 0 is the x and y location of the pendulum pin, and x equal to L sin theta and y equal to L cos theta are the locations of the mass. So at every time I am plotting these two and I am joining them by line. So what you will see is an animation of the pendulum when we solve its equation of motion. When we solve its equation of motion using MATLAB integrator, we are going to get the output as theta and theta dot, right? See what we are integrating for. When we integrate, I get Z1 and Z2. What is Z1? Z1 is theta, Z2 is theta dot. So first let me just run this part. Okay. So I have run this part. So you can see that size of t is 50,000. There are 50,000 time steps that I have solved the system for, because that is what I have prescribed. My t span is 0 to 0.01 to 500. So I have 50,000 time points. And I have two values for z. See, size of z. If I show you what is size of z, size of z is 50,001 into 2. That means there are so many rows and two columns. The first column corresponds to this angle. The second column corresponds to the velocity. So if I plot t comma z1, so what has happened? I have given a disturbance. Okay. There is damping in the system. There is the axial load. Everything is fine. So the system has damped and has come to rest. It has come to rest. It has come to the zero equilibrium. Okay. Is that clear? Is that clear to everyone? Is this plot clear? Maybe if you see the animation, you will appreciate it more. Let's see the animation. See the animation. With time, what will happen is that it will oscillate, it will oscillate, it will oscillate, and it will come to rest. Is that okay? Anybody has any questions? If someone has their microphone unmuted, can you please mute it? Yeah, good. So now you can see that if I increase the damping, so let's hold this animation for a minute. So let me plot just the response. See, I have defined, even in the output, I have defined Z1 equal to theta. So when I run it, you see a plot. Okay, this is a plot of theta versus time. If I increase the damping, it will come to zero quickly. Okay, maybe I should put a hold on. Okay, so let me show you. If I increase the damping, so this is for 0.1 damping. So if I increase the damping to C bar equal to 0.2, you see that it has come to rest more quickly. Everything is good. Is that okay, students? I hope this is clear enough. The x-axis is time, the y-axis is theta. Okay. Okay. Now, so we have got a working model of the system. We have not linearized anything. We have full nonlinear system. Okay. Now, let me increase P bar and see what will happen. Okay. So this is the animation of the pendulum for C bar equal to 0.2, and you can see that after some time the pendulum comes to rest. Okay, that means if I disturb it, the pendulum is going to return back to its equilibrium. That is vertically upward equilibrium. Now let me increase P bar. I will increase P bar to 5. That is the axial load, students. Remember, now I am increasing the axial load. I have fixed my C. My K is fixed to be 10. Now I am only playing with the axial load, the vertical load, P bar. So P bar equal to 5. Let's see what happens with P bar equal to 5. Still nothing. Okay. The pendulum oscillates and comes to rest. Is that okay, students? I hope it's okay to you. Let me increase the P bar to 8. Similar behavior. Nothing has happened till now. Okay. Let me increase the P bar to 11. Let's see what happens. It has gone to a different angle, so it has not returned to zero. It is going and settling at a different angle. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it has not returned to zero. But when the load is less than 10, for example, if I give the load to be 9, it is still going back to zero. Okay. So, but I wanted to show you one more thing before I move on to discuss some other things. Okay, that thing is, let me put the load to be 11. We know that if the load is 11, then it was not staying at 0, but it was going to some other position. But if I give the initial condition to be 0, that means I am not disturbing it. I am not at all disturbing it. The initial conditions are 0. Okay. So the pendulum will just stay there. Nothing has happened because I have not disturbed it. Okay. So if I plot t comma theta, it is at 0. Okay. But the moment I disturb it, I give it a very small initial condition, something like 1 e power minus 5, which is extremely small. Okay. You see what happens. Even with such a small disturbance, it is unable to stay at the vertically upward equilibrium and it has gone to some other equilibrium. Okay. Now if I give minus of this angle, what is going to happen? It is going to go to the left side, you see. It's a very small initial condition, extremely small initial condition. But you see what is happening. It has not returned to the zero equilibrium. So that is exactly what you have observed in this problem. You see, nothing is happening because I have not disturbed it. Nothing is happening, nothing is happening. Okay, it is vertically upwards like our pendulum. There is one axial load P. The initial conditions are zero, nothing is happening. The moment you disturb it, it has crushed, it has gone to a different configuration. Here the pendulum also has gone to a different configuration. It is vertically, it didn't stay in the vertically upward position. It has gone to some other angle depending upon which direction we have disturbed it. Okay. A similar phenomena also occurs in railway tracks. I wanted to show you. Okay, see this video carefully. See how the railway tracks have suddenly lost their equilibrium and they have become curved instead of being straight. There is another similar problem. It's called vacuum buckling. So if you remove the air from a cylinder, it is equivalent to applying pressure from outside because atmospheric pressure is there. If you remove air from inside, it's going to collapse at a critical vacuum or critical internal pressure, okay, negative pressure. So just check this video.
Is North America's leading producer of semi-trailers and liquid transportation systems. Wabash National Corporation's tank trailer portfolio includes some of the industry's most reputable brands, some of which have been in existence for over 100 years. With this type of experience, we're all too familiar with the effects of improper tank trailer loading and unloading. To demonstrate the impact of such an event, we orchestrated a controlled vacuum collapse or suck-in of a tank trailer. Keep in mind, most tank trailers are not capable of full vacuum, which is 14.7 psi of external pressure. Therefore, a processing error or an adverse condition may lead to a vacuum collapse and a total loss of the tank trailer. Some of the most common causes are 1. A closed manhole during unloading. 2. A vacuum relief vent rendered inoperable with congealed product. 3. Improper removal or plugging of a vacuum relief vent. 4. Significant temperature drops inside a closed tank immediately after cleaning. 5. Closed valves on the vapor return line during closed dome unloading. Of course, this list is not exhaustive or all-inclusive. For the demonstration, we used a 22-year-old Brenner tank with modified running and landing gear. The wrap and insulation were removed for better visibility. To create the vacuum, we connected the tank to a Progress truck-mounted vacuum tank. It's important to mention that the Brenner unit exceeded our expectations for external pressure performance. This 12-gauge stainless steel tank trailer withstood over 10.5 psi of external pressure, more than expected by calculation, with a reasonable factor of safety. This performance is a testament to the craftsmanship of our manufacturing associates. With this demonstration, we hope to provide you with a window into the dynamics of a vacuum collapse. We welcome you to utilize this video in employee and stakeholder training.
Jason, Dak, start the engine.
So they are pumping out the air from this long cylinder, and this is a camera that is inside the cylinder. You see the pressure, okay? They're creating the vacuum.
The gauge that's on top of the tank trailer is a vacuum gauge. That's showing negative pressure inside the tank.
So even submarines can collapse like that, right? I mean, submarine is also a cylindrical structure, and if it goes underwater very deep, there is an enormous amount of hydrostatic pressure, and if you take it to the right pressure, it can just collapse. Okay. So all those things are captured in our simple pendulum problem. We can see that as we increase p bar to be greater than 10, it has gone to a different position, even with the slightest of the disturbances. Otherwise, it returned to its zero equilibrium. So now let's understand why it is happening and how. Okay, so let's go back to the differential equation. Students, do you have any questions? So some of you may be faculty in institutes, and but still I'm calling you students, so I think it should be okay for you. So colleagues or students, whatever. Okay, friends. So do you have any questions?
It's going well.
Yes, who is that?
Ashok.
Ashok, please, Ashok.
Yeah, it's going well, Prakash. I was just.
Okay, thank you, Ashok, thank you. So let's proceed. So before we try to understand why this is happening, what is the reason behind that, we should quickly take a detour and try to understand what is a Taylor series. Okay. Taylor series says that any nonlinear function can be expanded about any arbitrary point x naught. The point can be arbitrary, okay, as follows: of x naught plus f prime. When I say f prime, it's anyway, I will write it full for now. Derivative of the function f evaluated at x equal to x naught into x minus x naught plus 1 by 2 factorial into dou square f d square f by dx square, again evaluated at x equal to x naught into x minus x naught whole square, and so on. This is the classical expression for the Taylor series. Let's take sine theta, for example, or sine x. Let me expand sine x around some point x equal to pi by 4. Pi by 4 is a good point. Okay. I can expand. Please understand that x naught is arbitrary. It can be anything. Okay. So I use pi by 4. Okay. So sin x can be written as f of x naught, that is sin pi by 4. Plus, what is the derivative of sin x? Derivative of sin x is cos x. So df by dx at x equal to x naught will be cos pi by 4. Into x minus pi by 4. And what is the second derivative of sin x? Derivative of sin x is cos x. Cos x is minus sin x. So I have minus sin pi by 4. There is 1 by 2 factorial into x minus pi by 4 whole square. and so on and so on. Okay. So if the function is continuous and differentiable n times, okay, n times in the sense sin x is infinitely differentiable and cos x is also infinitely differentiable. So this Taylor series converges as we increase the number of terms to the right hand side, to the left hand side. So if you truncate it to the finite number of times, then we replace the equal sign with approximation, right? Because only if I take infinite terms on the right hand side, the left hand side and right hand side will match. Otherwise, it's an approximation. If I truncate it with finite terms, for example, only 2 terms. And what is pi by 4? Pi by 4 is called the point of expansion. So around pi by 4, I am expanding the sin x in Taylor series. What is this? This is a constant. This is a constant. X minus something. So it's a line. Constant plus x square. Okay, so it's essentially these are all numbers. Okay, so it's something like a parabola. It's a quadratic function. So I'm approximating sin x as a quadratic function around pi by 4. Let's see how well is this approximation. Okay. And for that, I'll just write a small MATLAB code. Okay. First, let me define x equal to minus 2 pi. 2 pi. I'm going to plot x comma sin x. This is actual function sin x. That is how it looks like. Okay, is that fine, students? So we can even do it from maybe minus pi to pi instead of 2 pi because it's just okay. This is a sin x from minus pi to pi. Okay, now I have got a Taylor series expansion of it. I call x naught is the point of expansion, which was pi by 4. We can change it to anything we like. And the expansion is nothing but sin x naught plus cos x naught into x minus x naught plus 1 by 2 factorial into with a minus sign into x minus x naught whole square. That's just a syntax, student. So when I am squaring a vector, I have to use dot. So as I told you, if the programming is something that you don't follow, don't worry about it. You know, take a textbook and learn. But this is not a course in programming. I'm trying to explain you that the Taylor series gives you a fantastic match to the actual function around the point of expansion. So I'm going to use red dotted lines for you to see the difference. You see, this is the quadratic given by the Taylor series expansion, and this is the sine function, the blue one. Okay, now let me zoom in near the region pi by 4. Let me see what is value of pi by 4. So pi by 4 is around 0.785. So let me zoom in near 0.785. Somewhere here, right? Somewhere here. So between 0.4 and 1.3, you see, the match is damn good. I mean, see, they are indistinguishable, right? They're really close, really good. So even by taking 2 quadratic approximation of some highly nonlinear curve around some arbitrary point of expansion, I can get a reasonable match in the region of in the region that is close to point of expansion. Now even let me drop the quadratic terms. Okay, let me drop the quadratic terms. I am just including the linear term. Okay, let me see here. Do you agree that it is still a good match between 0.7 and 0.9? Yes, it is. So locally, I can expand a nonlinear function if it satisfies some properties like differentiability and continuity using a linear Taylor series expansion, and such an expansion closely matches the nonlinear curve, at least in the vicinity of point of expansion. This is extremely important observation for people studying nonlinear mechanics, because even in the finite element models of plasticity, in solid mechanics, everywhere the Newton-Raphson techniques, everything work by exploiting this particular idea. That means you can expand a function in the vicinity of the selected point using a simple linear equation, or if required quadratic equation. Okay, now once this is clear, okay, if you want more confidence, I can change this to pi by 6, pi by 6 or pi by 8. Okay, let me show you. Even at pi by 8 this holds true. Okay, now it has, the approximation is good near pi by 8. So it's arbitrary. So don't think that the Taylor series has to be expanded around 0, it has to be expanded around some point. No, the point can be arbitrary. And it doesn't matter what the point is. If you take infinite terms, it will match with the actual curve. But if you take finite terms, it will match with the actual curve near the vicinity of point of expansion. Now that's good. So we have come to some understanding of Taylor series. Now let's move on. Now we need to understand, this is a function of one variable, right? There is only a function of one variable. What if my f is a function of two variables? Let's say z1 and z2. z1 and z2 are variables. It's like x and y. What happens then? Then it's called a multivariable Taylor series. So essentially we are now talking about surfaces. What I have shown you in MATLAB is that we were dealing with only curves or lines in one dimensions. But in two dimensions or in higher dimensions, two dimensions is easy to visualize. That means any complex two-dimensional surface can be approximated by a parabola in two dimensions. If you use terms up to second order, or if you use terms up to first order, it can be approximated by a plane. Okay, a plane. So we exactly have a similar structure to it. Okay, we have f of z1, z2 evaluated at z1, 0, z2, 0, which is an arbitrary point in a two-dimensional plane. Okay, the z1 naught and z2 naught in this case. Don't, if you don't like the power, I can just use syntax z1, 0 and z2, 0. Okay, that is the first constant. That is the value of the function evaluated at z1, 0 and z2, 0. It's just like how sin x is evaluated at pi by 4. The two-dimensional function is evaluated at z1, 0 and z2, 0. Okay, I will show it to you by an example. Don't get confused. Since it's a two-dimensional function, the first derivative, the derivative becomes a partial derivative, because now f is a function of both z1 and z2. So I have to use partial here. Take a derivative with respect to z1, but evaluate it at z1, 0 and z2, 0 into z minus z1, 0. Z10 is a point along which I am expanding it. Similarly, I have the second term, Z minus Z20. Okay. So that's all, students. This is the linear approximation of a function. For example, if I am expanding sin x into cos y around pi by 4 comma pi by 3. That means I wanted to expand sin x comma cos y, which is a complicated surface, around x equal to pi by 4 and y equal to pi by 3. The constant term is nothing but sin pi by 4 cos pi by 3 plus what is the partial derivative of this thing with respect to x. With respect to x, I have sin x is cos x, cos y will remain as it is. This will be pi by 4 and this will be pi by 3. I have, instead of z minus z10, I have x minus pi by 4 plus what is the partial derivative of this with respect to y? Sin x will remain as it is, cos x will become, derivative of cos y is minus sin y. That's it. So that is a Taylor series expansion of a two-dimensional function about pi by 4 and pi by 3. The only thing you are seeing here is dou f by z, dou z1 and dou f by dou z2. This is dou f by dou z2. Sorry, I'm sorry. This is dou f by dou z2. So whatever is here should appear here. Okay. Is that clear? I hope this is clear to you right now. Is that clear? Now, what if I have two functions? Okay. This is the final step in the entire Taylor series expression. Instead of one function, let's say I have two functions, then I just replace f with f1. I replace f with f1. Let's say I have another function called f2, which is a function of z1 and z2. I just change 1 to 2, that's all, right? That's it. So I have two different functions, f1 and f2, which are functions of z1 and z2. f2 is also a function of z1 and z2. The point of expansion is z10, z20. So I can independently expand this and I can independently expand this. But for notational purposes, let me write them together. That's it. So this is approximation. Please understand. I am expanding it only up to first order. So if there were two functions, the first term is the constant, which is nothing but the value of the function evaluated at z10, z20. Similarly, for the second function, it's the value of the function evaluated at z10 and z20. Here I have z minus z10 and z minus z20, which is z1 minus z10 and z2 minus z20. Okay, because the variables are z1 and z2. This is fine. What is this? This is nothing but the Jacobian of these two functions, right? If I take the Jacobian, what is the Jacobian of this thing? The Jacobian is a matrix which is dou f1 by dou z1, dou f1 by dou z2 in the first row, and dou f2 by dou z1 and dou f2 by dou z2 in the second row. That is exactly the Jacobian. Jacobian of the function evaluated z10, z20. So if I generalize, so now I am generalizing, please focus. So there is a notation called bold notation. So when I write something in bold, okay, that means it's a vector. Okay, that means if I write bold z, that is equal to a vector. It can be an nth order vector. Okay, so it can be z1, z2, z3 and so on up to zn. Okay, similarly, now let's say if I have a bunch of functions, instead of z just z1 and z2, I have a bunch of functions. Now I am writing bold z here. Okay, that means my f1 is a function of z1, z2, z3, z4, z5 and zn. Similarly, my f2 is a function of z1, z2, z3, z4, zn. So I have many more such functions, let's say. f3 of z, fn of z. N functions are there. If I use similar notation, bold notation for f, okay, my f is bold now, and f is nothing but this thing, vector of functions, f1 of z, f2 of z. So the entire Taylor series can be written as if I have vector valued function f of z, its Taylor series nothing but f of z naught is bold, z is bold, f of z naught. So z naught are the points around which we are expanding, and the Jacobian of f. So I have slash partial. Don't worry about the notation. We will not go into really multi-dimensional cases, but it's not bad to just understand this at this point of time. So f is a vector and z is a vector. Okay, so dou f by dou z is a matrix. Okay, and you evaluate it at z equal to z naught. Okay. Okay, z equal to z naught, and I have z minus z naught, and both z's are bold. That means they are vectors. That's it. This is the This is the first order approximation of a vector valued function, where f are also vectors and z is also vector. And in two-dimensional case, it just takes this simple form, and this is nothing but the Jacobian. Is that okay, students? I hope this is fine. Okay. If you don't understand this, forget about it. At least try to go back and understand that a two-dimensional functions of two variables, f1 and f2, can be expanded like this. Okay. So let's go back to our differential equations. Good. Now we are here. Excellent. My first equation. This is my second equation. I don't have to expand Z2 because it is already linear. Compare it with this F1 and F2. F of Z1 and Z2 is Z2. F1 of Z1 and Z2 is Z2 in this case. So there is nothing I have to do. Okay. So these are my differential equations. Z1 dot equal to Z2 and Z2 dot equal to minus CZ2 minus KZ1 plus P sin Z1. So this is a linear term, I don't have to do anything. This is a linear term, I don't have to do anything. Okay. Fine. So let me actually, for the sake of explanation, I'm going to write it as F1 of Z1 and Z2. This I am going to write as F2 of Z1 and Z2. Is that okay, students? I think we are clear up to this point, right? So we have got these two differential equations. Z1 dot equal to f of Z1 Z2 and Z2 dot equal to F2 of Z1 Z2. What is F1 of Z1 Z2? It is Z2. What is F2 of Z1 Z2? These three expressions. Is that okay? I hope that is okay. Fine. So as I told you, any function can be expanded in Taylor series about some points. So I'm going to just go back and copy this thing. Okay. And put it here. So Z1 dot and Z2 dot can be expanded like this. I told you around the points Z1 0 and Z2 0, and this is nothing but the Jacobian of the right hand side functions. So this is a linear approximation of these nonlinear differential equations around points Z1 0 and around points Z2 0. Okay, around point Z1 0 and around point Z2 0. Okay. Now, I am interested in points where this term becomes 0. This term becomes 0. That means you substitute those points. What is Z1? Theta. What is Z2? Angle. You give me an angle and a velocity which, when substituted in this equation, the right hand terms will vanish. Do you agree that Z2 equal to 0 and Z1 equal to 0 is such a point? Because if I take Z2 equal to 0, this will vanish. This will vanish. Z1 equal to 0, this will vanish. Sin Z1 equal to 0, this will vanish. Do you agree, students? Okay. So such points, okay, where the right hand side of the differential equations vanish are called the equilibrium points or fixed points or stationary points. They are very important to us. Okay. Now, how do you find such points? Such points are found just by setting the right hand side to equal to 0, right? Because we want the right hand side to be equal to 0. So how do they find such points? Such points can be found by setting the right hand side to equal to 0. So I have Z2 equal to 0 and I set this thing equal to 0. So whatever points satisfy these two equations are my equilibrium points. Obviously Z2 has to be 0 at an equilibrium. What is Z2? Z2 is the velocity. So if a mechanical system is at equilibrium, it cannot be moving, right? So the velocity is 0. So if Z2 has to be 0, then the only condition for the second equation to vanish is this. Minus k z1 plus p sin z1 equal to 0. So p sin z1 is equal to kz1. Okay, k bar z1. I can take this to the other side. Yeah, I can take this to the other side. So I need to know the solutions of this equation. On the left side, I have sin z. On the right side, I have a line k by p into z1. So something interesting happens here. We will see. What is that? Let's see for the case when k bar by p bar is less than 1. Okay. Now again, I am going back to MATLAB. Okay. So I am my Z1, that is the angle. Okay, is nothing. I'm varying it from minus pi to plus pi. And I'm plotting Z1 comma sin Z1. Okay. So I'm just plotting that sine of that angle. On the right hand side, I have a line, just a line, right? Plot Z1. Let me say the line slope is 0.9 times Z1. See this line, nah? So what is the solution? The solution is the intersection of sin Z and this line, because these two has to be equal. Otherwise, it's not a solution, right? And of course, Z1 equal to 0 is a solution, because if I substitute Z1 equal to 0, this side is 0 and this side is 0. But there may be other solutions where the curve sin Z would intersect with these lines. Okay. So let's see when that k bar by p bar is less than 1, what happens? And I use a red curve. So students, you see what is happening. Okay, let me just give me 1 second. Let me go back and see. Minus k Z1 by P bar. Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. So K bar by P bar is less than 1, or I can always write it as P bar by K bar is greater than 1. Or let's say this case, yeah. Okay. Let me simplify it. I mean, it's confusing to you. So K bar is less than P bar, right? That's what it means, right? K bar is less than P bar, or P bar is greater than K bar. These two are same. So when K by P bar is less than 1, it means that P bar is greater than K bar. So when P bar is greater than K bar, okay, you see that there are 3 roots to the second equation. You see the roots? There is one root here where the curves are intersecting. There is a zero equilibrium, and there is another angle at which they are intersecting, and these two are symmetric. Okay. Okay, these two are symmetric in angles. Now let's look at the case when P bar by K bar is greater than 1. That means I use 1.1. Or P bar is less than K bar. You see there is only one root, that is Z equal to 0. So the other equilibriums are not there in the system. Okay. And in the limiting case, when P bar equal to K bar, in the limiting case of P bar equal to K bar, even in that case, you will see that barely there is only the zero equilibrium. If I increase it further, there will be 2 equilibriums. That means, let's go back to the system and understand. P bar, this entire thing has become P bar now, right? P bar in the converted coordinates. So so let me just so this has become P bar, this has become C bar, and this has become K bar. And as long as P bar is less than K bar, the pendulum has only one equilibrium, that is the vertical equilibrium. Okay, as long as P bar is less than K bar, it has only one equilibrium. So if I disturb it, it has to come back to this position. It cannot go anywhere else. But if P bar is greater than K bar, it has 2 new equilibriums along with the zero equilibrium. So it can go either here, or it can go either here, or it can stay here when P bar is greater than K bar. But what we have seen is that when P bar is greater than K bar, this zero equilibrium, we were unable to hold it, right? Even with a small increase in the load, when P bar is greater than K bar, even when I give a small disturbance, it has either gone this side or it has gone this side, depending upon which direction I have pushed it. Okay. So as long as the critical load was less than K bar, the system was stable. I disturb it, it comes back to equilibrium. But when I increase the P bar to greater than K bar, my zero equilibrium has lost its stability. We will understand the concept of stability as we move on, because we are just starting. This is just for you to give you an understanding of how we can understand these instabilities and how this information can be extracted from differential equations. So when P bar is greater than K bar, I know that the zero equilibrium has lost its stability and the pendulum is going to go this side or this side, no matter how small the disturbance is. So now we are going to focus on the stability of the system around the zero equilibrium. Okay, because we are linearizing it around the zero equilibrium. So we are going to study the stability of the system around the zero equilibrium. So let's go back. So Z1 equal to 0, Z2 equal to 0. I told you these points satisfy the right hand side equal to 0. So this term has to vanish. Okay. So this term has to vanish because that is equilibrium point. If I substitute Z1 equal to 0 and Z2 equal to 0, both these equations will vanish. This point will vanish. Now what is a Jacobian? What is dou F1 by dou Z1? If I take the derivative of Z2 with respect to Z1, I have 0. If I take the derivative of Z2 with respect to Z2, partial derivative, I have 1. If I take the partial derivative of F2 with respect to Z1, I have minus K. Minus K bar plus P bar cos Z1. And I am substituting Z1 equal to 0 because that's my point of expansion. So cos 0 is 1. Okay. So I am expanding it around 0 and Z1 equal to 0 and Z2 equal to 0. So these 2 points are gone now. And this will become 0. I don't care about this point anymore. I have. This is the linearized equation of the pendulum problem around equilibrium Z1 equal to 0 and Z2 equal to 0. Okay, this is the first column, students. Don't get confused that is P bar minus C bar. No, this is minus KP plus P bar, and this is the second column. So if I write it in the first order form, I have Z1 dot equal to Z2. I am just multiplying, expanding it for you to understand. Z1 dot equal to 0 into Z1, 1 into Z2, and Z2 dot equal to minus K plus P into Z1 minus C bar into Z2. Now, let's differentiate this equation. I have Z1 double dot equal to Z2 dot. Z1 double dot equal to Z2 dot. Z2 dot is nothing but this. Okay, and Z2 is nothing but Z1 dot. And what is Z1? Z1 is theta. Okay. So I bring it to the left hand side. I have SK minus P plus C theta dot equal to 0. You see, this is the linearized second order differential equation of the pendulum. You see? So when you linearize sine theta to be sine theta around 0, I have sine theta equal to theta. So I have K minus P bar into theta plus C theta dot plus theta. That is what I have got. But that's fine. This is a simple system. Let's imagine you are working on a very complicated multi-body system. Then this is the actual procedure to be followed. We solve the right hand side to be 0. We set the right hand side to be 0. We find the equilibrium points. We find the Jacobian, and the linearized equation is nothing but this about any fixed point. Fixed points are those points on which the right hand side vanishes. Any question? Hello? Please keep your mic on mute.
नहीं वो सब अपने अपने रूम्स में बैठे हैं ना अलग अलग तो
Okay. So, good. Now you tell me, you have been finding the...
और क्या कर रहे
So the coordinator can mute him manually, isn't it? Or
Just give me 1 minute, yaar.
हाँ बहुत सारे मिल जाएंगे
Okay. So, now we have got, we understood how to linearize a nonlinear system about its equilibrium points. And equilibrium points or fixed points are the points at which the right hand side of the differential equation vanishes when we express them in the first order form. Okay? And around those points, we can always write the equation in this particular form. And the first term will vanish because they are the fixed points. Good. So what about the nature of the solutions of this equation? You have studied differential equations many times, but you might have not understood the beauty of it. The first thing we do is we assume a solution of this form e power st or lambda t. That means the solutions are exponential in nature. Okay. So if you substitute this solution, I get lambda square plus k bar minus p bar plus c bar equal to 0. Do you agree? So this is called the characteristic equations, students. So we are assuming a particular solution of the form e power lambda t. I don't know what is the solution, but once I substitute it, I realize that whatever roots satisfy this equation has to admit a solution of this form. Because if I substitute this solution in the differential equation, I got this expression. Wherever this expression vanishes, whatever value of lambda for which this expression vanishes is indeed a solution. Okay. So it's a quadratic. I have two roots. What are the roots? Minus b plus or minus square root b square minus 4 AC two roots. Is that okay, students? I hope that is fine. But something very interesting is going to happen when, see, let's understand the root. C bar is a positive quantity, okay? So it has a negative value, okay? And if K bar minus P bar is quantity in the right hand side, let's say that is greater than 1 or greater than greater than 0, that's correct. If K bar minus P bar is greater than 0,
फाइल सीओपीओ की फाइल चाहिए थी सीओपीओ जो बनाए थे
Please mute yourself, Dr. Neeraj.
see, let's see the case when K bar minus P bar is greater than 0. That is, K bar is greater than P bar. Okay. When K bar is greater than P bar, this quantity is positive. Okay, small value, and I think I'll slightly write it differently so that you can appreciate what is going on. I will write plus P bar minus K bar. It's the same thing. I'm just taking minus common so that you can understand. So when P bar is less than K bar, okay, first let's see the case of P bar equal to K bar. That's the simplest case to see. So when P bar equal to K bar, my roots are zero, comma minus 2C bar, because this quantity will vanish, okay, and this quantity will vanish, and square root of C square is C, so I have minus C plus C, that is 0. Another thing is minus C, that is minus 2C, 2 gets cancelled, I have 0 comma minus C. So when P bar equal to K bar, I have my roots are 0 comma minus C. Similarly, when P bar minus K bar is greater than 0, so I will have two roots which have, so let's consider the case when P bar minus K bar is greater than 0, or P bar minus K bar is P bar minus K bar is less than 0, or P bar is less than K bar. Let's consider this case. P bar minus K bar is less than 0. So this quantity, of course, C square is positive. For the root to be of course, it can have oscillatory solutions, but don't worry about it. It can have oscillatory solutions. But see, what I will do is, you remember that when P bar equal to K bar, the roots are 0 and minus C. So it is one real 0 root and the other root is negative root. Okay, and you will notice that the eigenvalues of this characteristic equation. So what is this is the characteristic equation of the second order equation, right? Okay, if I ask you to find the eigenvalues of this system z1 dot equal to z2 0 1 minus k plus p bar 1 comma minus c z1 z2 z dot equal to az, what are the eigenvalues of a? eigenvalues of A are found like this, right? Set minus lambda I and minus C bar minus lambda I. And you take the determinant of this, right? That's how you find the eigenvalues of this matrix A. Z dot equal to AZ. That's a linearized equation, and you will see that the equation you get from this is exactly same as this equation. So is that okay, students? For example, take the determinant. What do you get? The determinant is minus lambda into minus C minus lambda plus, sorry, again minus AD minus BC, na? So minus so this is exactly lambda square plus C lambda plus K bar minus P bar equal to 0. Do you agree that the characteristic equation of the original second order equation is same as the eigenvalues of the linearized differential equation? Okay, so to look at the roots, instead of just solving this cases independently, I can just look at the eigenvalues of this 0, 1, minus K bar plus P bar and minus C. So I go back to MATLAB and I have this matrix which is 0, 1, minus K bar plus P bar and minus C bar. Okay, and I am going to find the eigenvalues of A and I am going to plot real part of okay, let me first show you, let me go back, take these values, whatever we were using, and show you that it calculates the eigenvalues. See, A is a diagonal matrix, that's fine. I am calculating the eigenvalues now. This is the syntax, and these are the eigenvalues. One eigenvalue is negative and one eigenvalue is positive. Okay. Now let's consider the case when P bar is less than K bar. Okay, when P bar is less than K bar, there is only one equilibrium, that is 0. So let me take P bar equal to 8 and look for the eigenvalues. Okay. So there are two complex conjugates. Okay, two complex conjugates with negative real part. Now we have to understand some things when we discuss the characteristic roots. Okay, so let me just delete this for a second and explain you what is the nature of the solutions. For example, if I have an equation like this, and if I say that my characteristic roots are -1 and -2, they are negative, both negative and both real. So what is the solution? For example, the solution will be some constant into e power -1t plus some constant into e power -2t. Because, for example, if these values satisfy the characteristic equation, that means e power -1t is a solution and e power -2t is a solution. Their linear combination is also a solution because it's a linear differential equation. So what is the nature of the solution? As time progresses, this will go to 0. As time progresses, this will go to 0. Because e power minus, let's say e power minus 10t. What is e power minus 10t? 1 by e power 10t, right? So it's a 1 divided by a very large number. As time progresses, it will go to 0. So this will go to 0 and this will go to 0. I can show it to you if you want, if you don't trust me. So let's say t equal to 0 to 0, 0, some 100. Okay, I'm going to plot e power minus exp is the correct e power minus 10t versus t, or 1t for example. There is no 10 in our example. See how it decayed, quickly it decayed. So e power minus 2t will decay faster than e power minus 10t. See, the red curve decayed faster to 0 than the blue curve. Now this is one possibility. And the other possibility is 1 negative, 1 positive. So this will decay to 0, but this will grow because e power t will grow with time. If I use 1 here, you see what will happen? It will go to infinity, you see? 1 will go to infinity. Now, so we have seen the cases of both positive. Both positive will also go to infinity. Both positive means it will be 1t and 2t, it will go to infinity. Both negative, it will decay. 1 positive, 1 negative is also not good. It will go to infinity. Okay. What about complex numbers? If I have, of course, if the roots are complex, they have to appear as complex conjugates. Okay. So they will be of the form. I've already used alpha, so I will use gamma plus or minus I omega. They have to be complex conjugates, otherwise they cannot be a quadratic equation having 2 complex roots. They have to be complex conjugates. Okay, so now that is what I have here. Now something interesting turns out. If they are complex conjugates, I can take e power I omega t common from both the expressions. The solution will become 1 e power gamma t plus, sorry, I should take e power gamma t common, that is better. I have, if I take e power gamma t common, I have C1 plus C2. Let me expand it, you may get confused. So this is nothing but, let's say this is my solution for the case of complex conjugates. I have e power gamma t. I also have e power gamma t here. I'm just multiplying t inside and taking it inside. I have something like this. I should not use plus or minus. One is minus and one is plus. That's how the roots are here. Here it is fine. So that's how the solution is. Okay, one is e power gamma t plus I omega t. One is gamma t minus I omega t. So I can take e power gamma t common. If I take e power gamma t common, this will go away. This term will go away. This term will go away. E power I omega t is cos omega t plus I sin omega t. And e power minus I omega t is cos omega t minus I sin omega t. So I have C1 plus C2 into cos omega t plus C1 minus I C2 into sin omega t. Okay, so I can define two new constants, okay, d1 and d2, such that d1 equal to c1 plus c2 and d2 equal to c1 minus I c2. Then I have to multiply it here also. I call this d1. I call this d2. Now you see, students, sin omega t and cos omega t are oscillatory functions. So they don't decay. Okay, and d1 and d2 are just constants. They are constant numbers. So whether the solution will decay or whether the solution will grow will depend upon the sign of gamma. If gamma is negative, e power minus gamma t will decay. That means the entire theta will decay. Otherwise, it will not decay. So the solutions will decay when real part of gamma is less than 0. Otherwise, they will not decay. I will show you this with our eigenvalue. For example, let's go back to the pendulum problem. I told you the linearized case, all I need to do is remove that sign, because then we have the linearized case. Okay. Let's consider the case of P bar less than K bar, that is 8. So there is only one equilibrium, that is 0 equilibrium in this case. What is happening to the solutions? Let me give an angle of 5 degrees. So 5 degrees is like 5 by 18 or something like that. You can see that the solution is oscillatory and decaying. Why oscillatory and decaying? Because if you look at the eigenvalues of this matrix, for these values, you will see that the eigenvalues are complex conjugates, but the real part is negative. And there is an imaginary part which determines the frequency of oscillations. And the real part shows that the solution is going to decay. But something very funny and interesting is going to happen when P bar equal to K bar. When P bar equal to K bar, that is 10. One of the eigenvalue is 0 and one of the eigenvalue is negative. Okay? Fine. One of the eigenvalue is 0 and one of the eigenvalue is negative. Now let's see what happens when P bar is greater than K bar. That is, I use 11. One is negative and one is positive. What does it mean? The solution will go away from 0 equilibrium, right? Because of this lambda. If one solution has a negative real part and one solution has a positive real part, the characteristic roots or the eigenvalues of A matrix, this positive part is going to take you away from the 0 equilibrium, and that too exponentially fast, because I have a e power 0.9t term in the solution. That is exactly what is happening. You see, if I go back and make it solve this problem with 11 as P bar, you see what happens. It is going to go away. Don't think that it is turning. Okay, this is kind of you should look at theta. Okay, of course it is a pendulum. It will go around. Okay, because the way I have plotted it. But if I show you theta, what is happening to theta? It is becoming infinity. So the linear theory says that when p bar crosses k bar or p bar increases k bar, my zero equilibrium cannot be it will not stay there. It is going to move away from it exponentially fast. Where it will go, the linear theory cannot say that. To know where it will go, I have to include the sign term. Now if I solve, okay, for p bar greater than 11, I know that it is going to go to this equilibrium, whatever that angle is, which we found, which is equal to kz equal to p bar sin z. Wherever that equilibrium is, it will go there. But linear theory doesn't have that information because linear theory model is only the model around the zero equilibrium. It can tell you if the stability is lost, and it tells you that the solutions are going to move exponentially fast away from the equilibrium, but it cannot tell you where it will go. So when we are designing a nonlinear system, the first thing we do is that we set the right hand side equal to 0, we find the equilibrium points, then we see by varying different parameters how the stability of equilibrium changes and where it will go. For example, the Kola buckling problem, you can solve the entire problem using the finite element software. The linear theory will tell that this is a critical load because at this load or more than the critical load, at this load, you can be at the equilibrium, but it is not stable. The moment you disturb it, it's going to collapse. But you need to get this configuration of the cola can, you need to solve the nonlinear problem. Okay. Okay. Similarly, for the railway track problem, you see, you can tell that the tracks will be straight up to some load. After that load, what shape they take, you have to know what shape they take. You have to solve the nonlinear problem. Okay. So and meet at 11:45.
Yeah. Yes,
And
Prakash.
discuss some other things, and then we'll slowly move to delay. Okay.
Yeah, there are some participants who are quite curious to know about delay. They are writing it in the chat box.
What is that? I did not see anything.